I stood in the conference room, surrounded by my colleagues, but my mind was elsewhere. David, the new hire, had just introduced himself with a confidence that turned heads. His voice was smooth, his smile disarming. I felt an inexplicable pull towards him, something that made my heart race. When our eyes met across the room, it was electric, a sharp jolt that sent warmth flooding through my body. I could hardly focus on the presentation. "Are you all right?" my colleague whispered, noticing my distraction. I forced a smile, pretending to pay attention, but my thoughts were consumed by David. How could this be happening? I glanced at my husband, Jake, sitting at the other end of the table, oblivious to my turmoil. The guilt settled heavy in my chest, but the spark of attraction was undeniable. As the meeting dragged on, I stole glances at David. He caught me once, a smirk playing on his lips, as if he knew the chaos he was causing within me. I bit my lip, trying to suppress the rising tide of desire. What was wrong with me? I had a good life, a loving husband who deserved better than my wandering thoughts. Yet, the more I fought it, the more I felt drawn to him. Could a simple meeting change everything? Was this just a fleeting moment? Or was it the beginning of something far more dangerous? The air in the conference room felt charged, almost electric, as David stood before us, presenting his ideas with a confidence that made my heart race. Something about him captivated me from the very first moment. His deep voice echoed in my ears, but it was the way he looked at me that truly held my attention. Our eyes met across the table, and in that brief moment, a spark ignited between us. I felt a warmth spread through my body, a sensation I hadn't felt in a long time. It was thrilling and terrifying all at once. I tried to focus on the presentation, but my mind kept wandering back to that look we shared. I felt guilty as my thoughts drifted to Jake, my husband. He was everything I thought I wanted: steady, reliable, loving. But as I glanced at David again, I couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to explore this undeniable attraction. It felt like a betrayal to even think about it, and yet I was powerless against the pull I felt towards him. Later that day, as I sat at my desk, I heard David's voice calling my name. "Hey, do you want to grab lunch outside the office?" His suggestion hung in the air like a dare, and I could feel my heart racing again. I looked up, surprised, my stomach flipping at the thought of spending more time with him. Sure," I replied, trying to sound casual, but inside, I was anything but calm. As we walked to a nearby cafe, the tension between us was palpable. We talked about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing easily. "So, what do you like to do when you're not working?" he asked, his eyes sparkling with curiosity. "I love to read, mostly romance novels," I admitted, feeling a little shy. "And you?" "Same here," he said with a chuckle. "I'm a sucker for a good love story." Our laughter filled the space around us, creating a bubble that felt just ours. For that hour, I forgot about the guilt gnawing at me. It was just me and David, lost in our own world. But as we shared stories and discovered our common interests, a disturbing thought crept into my mind. What would it be like if Jake weren't in my life? I pushed the thought away, feeling a pang of guilt. David was charming and intelligent, and I felt a connection that was hard to ignore. I couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to be with him. To explore this chemistry that was so strong, it felt like a tangible force between us. When we returned to the office, the tension lingered. I could hardly concentrate on work, my thoughts drifting back to our lunch. I found myself smiling at memories of our laughter, the way he looked at me, and the thrill of our connection. It was exhilarating and frightening, a roller coaster of emotions that left me breathless. In the days that followed, Our interactions became charged with an unspoken promise. Each time we crossed paths, I felt a rush of excitement, a dangerous thrill that made my heart race. I caught him stealing glances my way, his eyes filled with a mix of desire and curiosity. I tried to shake off the feelings, reminding myself of my loyalty to Jake. But the more I fought it, the stronger the attraction became. Then came the day when David leaned over my desk, our faces close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I really enjoyed our lunch. We should do it again sometime," he said, his voice low and inviting. My breath hitched in my throat. "Yes, I'd like that," I managed to reply, my heart pounding. As we continued to work together, the connection deepened. Every laugh we shared, every brush of our hands felt like a secret exchange, a silent agreement that we were both aware of the tension simmering just beneath the surface. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were dancing on the edge of something dangerous, something exhilarating. One evening, after a long day at the office, David suggested we grab a drink to unwind. "It'll be just a quick drink," he promised, his eyes sparkling with mischief. I hesitated, thinking of Jake, but the thrill of the invitation was too hard to resist. "Okay," I agreed, my heart racing as I wondered what the evening might hold. As we sat in the dim light of the bar, I felt an electrifying buzz in the air around us. The drinks flowed, and with each sip, the walls I had built around myself began to crumble. We talked and laughed, sharing stories and dreams, and I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't experienced in years. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like if we just let go?" David asked, his gaze piercing mine. The question hung in the air, heavy with possibility. I swallowed hard, my heart racing. "All the time," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I could see the desire in his eyes, and it sent shivers down my spine. In that moment, I knew I was walking a fine line. I couldn't ignore the thrill of his presence, the way he made me feel alive. But the thought of Jake lurked in the back of my mind, a reminder of the life I had built. I was trapped in a whirlwind of emotions, torn between the comfort of my marriage and the intoxicating allure of something new, something that made my heart race and my skin tingle. As the evening drew to a close, I felt a sense of longing I couldn't shake. "I should get going," I said reluctantly, my heart heavy with the weight of what could never be. But as I stood to leave, David reached out and gently took my hand, his touch igniting a fire within me. "Let's not let this be the last time," he said softly, his eyes searching mine. And in that moment, I knew I was on the brink of something I could no longer ignore. I'm sitting at my desk, the hum of the office all around me, but my mind is elsewhere. It started with a simple presentation, one that I thought would be just another mundane part of my day. David, the new collaborator, stood at the front of the room, his confidence radiating like a beacon. I remember the way he spoke, his voice smooth and engaging, drawing everyone in. But it was his eyes that captured me, dark and intense, and for a moment, I felt like we were the only two people in the room. As we locked gazes, a spark ignited between us. I could feel the heat creeping up my neck, and I knew it was more than just professional admiration. There was something primal, something electric that pulled me towards him. I glanced away, reminding myself of Jake, my husband, the man I had promised to love and cherish. But the guilt washed over me like a cold wave. How could I feel this way about someone else? After the meeting, I tried to shake off the lingering feelings, but they clung to me. The days passed, and I found myself stealing glances at David whenever I could. Each time our eyes met, there was that same charged silence, as if the world around us faded away. It was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. Then came the unexpected invite. How about lunch outside the office tomorrow? David suggested, leaning closer, his breath brushing against my skin. My heart raced. I wanted to say yes, to explore this connection that was blossoming between us, but a voice in my head shouted for caution. I'll think about it, I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. But I could feel the tension in the air, a silent agreement that something was shifting. The next day arrived, and I found myself sitting across from him in a small cafe, the atmosphere buzzing with conversation and clinking cutlery. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, laughter spilling from my lips as we discovered shared interests in books, films, and even music. Each laugh felt like a thread weaving us closer together, and I could hardly believe I was having so much fun while Jake was at work, oblivious to this budding connection. I caught myself wondering what life would be like if Jake wasn't in the picture, but I quickly pushed the thought away, guilt gnawing at my insides. Yet as we talked, I could feel the thrill of attraction growing, a dangerous allure that beckoned me to step closer to the edge. Then came the late nights at the office, working together on a project that seemed to consume us. The work was demanding, but I was lost in the moments we shared, the way our shoulders brushed against each other as we reached for the same papers. One night, as I passed him a stack of documents, our fingers accidentally touched. The sensation was electric, sending a shockwave through my body. I looked up, and there it was again, his gaze, filled with an unspoken promise that set my heart racing. "Sorry about that," I said, trying to sound casual. He smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. "No need to apologize. I didn't mind." That night, after hours of work, we found ourselves in the parking lot. The moon hung low, casting a silvery glow over everything. And then, without thinking, I leaned in, and our lips met in a soft, tentative kiss. It was as if the world fell away, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. The kiss was brief, but it sealed everything that had been building between us. When we pulled back, breathless, I knew this was no longer just a flirtation. It was something deeper, something undeniable. As I drove home, my heart raced, but guilt settled heavily in my chest. I replayed the kiss in my mind, the thrill of it clashing with thoughts of Jake, who was waiting for me at home. I had crossed a line, and the weight of my actions pressed down on me. But I couldn't shake the feeling of exhilaration that accompanied my betrayal. The days turned into a blur of stolen moments and lingering touches, the thrill of our secret, becoming an addiction I couldn't resist. Each time we shared a quiet moment at work, I could feel the tension building, the air thick with unspoken words and desires. I started to live for our late-night meetings and the stolen glances that set my heart racing. But with every thrill came a wave of guilt. I struggled to reconcile the love I felt for Jake with this all-consuming passion for David. The more I saw David, the more I craved him, and the more I felt I was losing myself. Every laugh and every touch felt like a step further into a dangerous game I was playing. Yet, I couldn't stop. The project that brought us together had become a catalyst for something far more profound and intoxicating. Every moment spent working late felt like a brush against fate, an undeniable pull that I couldn't resist, even as I fought against the guilt that threatened to consume me. It was as if I was under a spell, enchanted by the very thing that could destroy everything I held dear. I'm sitting at my desk, the hum of the office around me, but I'm lost in thoughts of David. It started innocently enough. He was the new guy, and during that first meeting, when he walked in, I felt a shift in the air. My heart raced as I took in his confident presence. I remember the way he spoke, his voice deep and smooth, yet it was the look we exchanged that left me breathless. His eyes were piercing, filled with an intensity that felt electric. I couldn't shake the feeling that he saw right through me. Peeling back the layers I carefully wrapped around myself, As the meeting went on, I tried to focus on the presentation, but every time our eyes met, a heat coursed through my body, igniting something deep within me. I glanced at my wedding ring, the weight of it suddenly feeling heavier. Jake, my husband, was the reason I shouldn't be feeling this way. The guilt settled in my chest, an unwelcome companion to the thrill David stirred within me. How could I be attracted to someone else? How could I betray the love I had promised to Jake? The days passed, and the temptation grew stronger. When David suggested lunch outside the office, my heart raced with excitement and fear. "How about we grab a bite? Just the two of us," he said, the corner of his mouth lifting into a playful smile. I hesitated, knowing I should decline, but the thrill of his invitation was too enticing. "Sure, why not?" I replied, trying to sound casual, but my voice wavered slightly. As we walked to the cafe, the tension between us was palpable. Conversations flowed easily, laughter punctuating our exchanges. But beneath it all was a current of something deeper. I caught myself stealing glances at him, taking in the way his lips curled into a smile, the way his eyes sparkled when he talked about his hobbies. It was exhilarating. I thought about Jake, and guilt washed over me again. But it was quickly replaced by the thrill of connection I felt with David. Those lunch breaks turned into stolen moments. Each encounter heightened the anticipation, and soon, our late nights at the office became a routine. Working together, we shared more than just tasks. I remember the first time our hands brushed while passing documents. It was electric, a spark that ignited a fire I didn't want to extinguish. "Sorry," I said, pulling my hand back, but David's gaze lingered on me, a smirk playing on his lips. "It's okay," he replied, his voice low. I think we both know it was more than just an accident. The heat in my cheeks betrayed me. I was crossing a line, but the thrill was intoxicating. One evening, as we stood in the dimly lit parking lot, our eyes locked, the world around us faded. In one daring moment, he leaned in and captured my lips with his. It was a kiss filled with all the unspoken words, a promise of what could be. I pulled back, breathless, my heart racing with excitement and fear. "We can't do this," I whispered. But the truth was, I wanted more. As the days turned into weeks, our exchanges became bolder. Messages flew back and forth, filled with innuendos and teasing remarks. I found myself checking my phone constantly, the thrill of a new message from him sending shivers down my spine. "What are you wearing?" he texted one afternoon, and I felt a rush of heat. A part of me wanted to respond playfully, but the reality of my marriage loomed over me. I began to have dreams that left me wanting more. Jake would be asleep beside me, and I would lose myself in fantasies of David's touch, his lips tracing my skin. Each morning, I would wake, guilt crashing over me like a tidal wave. Yet, the thought of David consumed me, and the anticipation of our next encounter made my heart race. I can't remember when I told my first lie to Jake about a meeting that didn't exist, but I remember the knot in my stomach as I spoke the words. "Are you sure you have to work late again?" Jake asked one evening, concern etched on his face. "Yes, there's a lot to get done for the project," I replied, forcing a smile. I could see the doubt in his eyes, but I pushed it aside, knowing I wouldn't be working. I would be with David. The excitement of planning our next meeting filled me with a sense of freedom. I felt alive in a way I hadn't for a long time. The thrill of the chase, the danger of what we were doing, was intoxicating. Every time David texted me, my heart raced, and I found myself smiling like a teenager with a crush. The world outside faded, and it was just us, lost in our own little bubble of desire and secrecy. But with each thrill came the weight of my decisions. I was living a double life, caught between pleasure and guilt. Jake began to notice my mood shifts, the way I would become distant after spending time with David. Is everything okay?" he would ask, concern lacing his voice. I would reassure him, but inside, I felt like I was unraveling. The fantasies grew more elaborate, pulling me deeper into a web of deceit. Every moment spent with David felt like a stolen treasure, yet I couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. I was walking a tightrope, and with each step, the thrill of the fall whispered in my ear. The dread of what would happen if I was discovered loomed large, but the pull of David was too strong to resist. I was ensnared in a passion that felt all-consuming, and the thought of letting it go terrified me. In the quiet moments, I found myself torn. I loved Jake, but the fire that David ignited in me was undeniable. I was caught in a whirlwind of emotions, each day bringing new temptations and new lies. The exhilaration of my secret life was intoxicating, but the guilt weighed heavily on my heart. I was lost, and the path ahead seemed murky and uncertain, but one thing was clear. I was in too deep, and there was no turning back now. I'm not sure how I found myself here, standing outside the motel, my heart racing with a mix of excitement and dread. It felt surreal, like stepping into a scene from a forbidden novel. But this was my reality now. David had suggested this place, a discreet little motel on the outskirts of the city, and I knew we were crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. But the pull between us was undeniable, and I couldn't resist. As I pushed the door open, the musty smell of cheap furnishings filled my nostrils. The room was dimly lit, and there was a sense of secrecy that wrapped around us like a heavy blanket. I glanced at David, and his eyes were ablaze with desire. It was as if the world outside had faded away, leaving only the two of us in this bubble of anticipation. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He stepped closer, his gaze locked onto mine, making it hard to breathe. "I've never been more sure about anything in my life. This is what we want, isn't it?" I nodded, feeling the heat radiating from him. The guilt of my life with Jake crashed down on me like a wave, but it felt distant in that moment. All I could think about was the intoxicating energy between David and me. Before I could second-guess myself, David reached for me, his fingers brushing against my arm, igniting a spark that sent shivers down my spine. "Let's not think about anything else right now," he said, his voice low and filled with promise. As if on cue, he closed the distance between us, pulling me into him. Our lips met in a rush of passion, the kind that I hadn't felt in a long time. It was electric. I melted against him, the taste of his mouth, a heady blend of desire and urgency. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Just him and the fire that raged between us. "God, I've wanted this," David murmured against my lips, his hands finding their way to my waist. "I've wanted you for so long." I felt a thrill run through me. My mind flickered back to Jake, to the life we shared. But here, in this moment, wrapped in David's arms, I couldn't think of anything else. I wanted to give in completely, to let go of my responsibilities and just feel. "Me too," I confessed, pulling back slightly to look into his eyes. "But what about Jake? He doesn't deserve this." David's expression hardened for a moment, but then softened as he caressed my cheek. "This is about us, about what we feel. I'm not asking you to forget your life, just to embrace this moment." He was right, and I knew it. The world outside faded more with each passing second. We were two souls drawn together by an undeniable magnetism, and I couldn't fight it anymore. I was tired of the facade, of pretending everything was perfect when it wasn't. "Okay," I breathed, my heart pounding in my chest. "Let's just be here, just for tonight." David's smile was pure mischief as he leaned in, capturing my lips again. This kiss was deeper, more urgent, as if we were both desperate to consume each other. I felt my body responding to him, my skin tingling everywhere he touched. The thrill of doing something so forbidden heightened my senses, and I found myself craving more. He led me to the bed, and I felt a rush of adrenaline as I sat down, my heart racing. "Are you sure you want this?" he asked, his voice a husky murmur. "Yes," I replied, my voice trembling with longing. "I want this." His hands explored my body, igniting a fire within me that I didn't know I had. Each touch felt like a revelation, a promise of what was to come. I could hardly believe this was happening, that I was here, in this moment, with him. "Let go of everything else," he whispered, capturing my gaze. "Just focus on us." And that's exactly what I did. I closed my eyes, surrendering to the sensations, the passion, the thrill of being with him. Every kiss, every touch was a new discovery, a new height of pleasure that left me breathless. I was lost in him, in the fantasy we were creating together, and for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. Time seemed to stand still as we surrendered to each other. The world outside became a distant memory, and all that existed was the heat of our bodies, the sweetness of our kisses, and the desperate need to be closer. I let go of the guilt, the shame, and for that night, I was simply me, free to explore this wild, reckless passion. As the night unfolded, I realized I had crossed a line, one that would change everything. But in that moment, I didn't care. All I could think about was David and the way he made me feel, desired, cherished, and utterly alive. I'm standing in front of the mirror, adjusting my blouse, and I can hardly recognize the woman looking back at me. My heart races as I remember the thrill of those secret moments with David. Each time I return home after being with him, I feel a mix of pleasure and guilt swirling inside me. It's like I'm living two lives, and I don't know how much longer I can keep it up. Jake greets me with his usual warm smile as I step through the door. "Hey, how was your day?" he asks, his eyes filled with genuine curiosity. I feel a pang of guilt twist in my stomach. I can't tell him about the late-night meetings or the stolen kisses. "It was fine," I reply, forcing a smile. "Just the usual work stuff." I can see the flicker of concern in his eyes, but he nods, accepting my answer. It's the small moments like this that make my heart ache. I love him, I do. He's been my rock, my safe space. But with David, it's different. There's an intensity, a passion that I've never experienced before. I can't help but think of him, of how he makes me feel alive in a way Jake no longer does. Later that evening, I sit on the couch, my mind racing with thoughts of David. I can't shake the images of our last encounter. The way his eyes sparkled with mischief, how his fingers brushed against my skin, sending shivers down my spine. I remember the way he leaned in, whispering, "You have no idea what you do to me." His breath was warm against my ear, igniting something deep within me. As I try to focus on the television, Jake sits beside me, oblivious to the storm brewing in my heart. "What are you thinking about?" he asks, glancing at me with a concerned look. I swallow hard, feeling the weight of my secret pressing down on me. "Just work," I lie, forcing my voice to sound casual. But inside, I'm screaming with frustration and desire. The tension between my love for Jake and my passion for David is becoming unbearable. I find myself daydreaming about David more often. His smile, the way he laughs, the way he looks at me as if I'm the only person in the room. I can't help but wonder what it would be like to be free of all this guilt, to embrace the thrill of being with him openly. Every time Jake questions me about my late nights, I feel my heart race. "You've been working late a lot recently. Is everything okay?" he asks, his brow furrowing in concern. I nod quickly, avoiding his gaze. "Just some deadlines. You know how it is." I hate lying to him, but I can't bear the thought of losing him, of shattering the life we've built together. But then there's David. I can't deny the magnetic pull I feel towards him. It's intoxicating, like a drug I can't get enough of. Each text we exchange is charged with double meanings, and I find myself blushing at the thought of our conversations. I think about the way he makes me laugh, how easy it is to talk to him. It's a connection I haven't felt in years. Are you sure you're all right? Jake's voice pulls me back to the present. I look at him, and for a moment, I see the love in his eyes. So sincere, so trusting. I feel tears threaten to spill over. I'm fine, really, I manage to say, though the words taste bitter on my tongue. That night, as I lie in bed next to Jake, I can't sleep. I'm haunted by thoughts of David. I can almost hear his voice in my head, teasing me, challenging me to embrace the wild side of life. I feel an overwhelming desire to be with him again, to feel his touch, to lose myself in the passion that he ignites within me. But then, there's Jake. I can't shake the feeling of betrayal that gnaws at me. I love him, but every time I close my eyes, all I see is David. The way he looks at me with those smoldering eyes, the way he kisses me as if I'm the only thing that matters in his world. It's a whirlwind of emotions that leaves me dizzy and confused. The dilemma weighs heavily on my mind. I find myself daydreaming about what my life would look like if I were with David. I imagine us laughing together, exploring new places, sharing secret moments that only belong to us. The thought sends a thrill through me, but the guilt crashes over me like a tidal wave. I can't just walk away from Jake, can I? As I try to navigate this web of emotions, I realize that I'm at a crossroads. I can't keep living this double life. Something has to give. But as I sit there, torn between the two men who represent different parts of my life, I know I have to make a choice. My heart aches at the thought of hurting Jake, but the pull towards David is undeniable. Just then, my phone buzzes, and my heart skips a beat. It's a message from David, simple yet electrifying. I can't stop thinking about you. My breath catches in my throat. I know that whatever choice I make, it will change everything. The thrill of the unknown beckons me, and I feel my resolve waver as I stare at the screen, contemplating my next move. I'm not sure how it happened, but somehow David's invitation felt like a turning point. Why don't we escape for the weekend? Just you and me at a cabin in the mountains, he suggested, his voice low and smooth, sending shivers down my spine. The idea was exciting, yet terrifying, a mix of thrill and dread that left me breathless. I couldn't shake off the nervousness that settled in my stomach as I thought about how I would explain this to Jake. I have a work trip, I practiced in my mind, repeating it like a mantra. Just a little conference. Would he buy it? My heart raced as I imagined the look on Jake's face when I told him. What do you think? David asked, his eyes glinting with mischief. I could see in his gaze that he was just as eager for this escape as I was. The way he looked at me made my heart flutter. It was as if we were the only two people in the world. I don't know, I replied, trying to sound nonchalant while my heart thudded against my ribs. It seems risky. Risky can be fun, he teased, leaning closer. Just think about it. A cozy cabin, just the two of us, away from all this. He waved his hand around, dismissing the office and everything that came with it. I could feel the pull of temptation, the lure of that cabin calling to me. The idea of being alone with him, away from everything, sent waves of excitement coursing through me. What if Jake finds out? I asked, a small part of me still clinging to the reality I was trying to escape. Just don't tell him. David shrugged, his smile widening. It's just a weekend. No harm in that, right? I hesitated, the weight of my marriage pressing heavily on my conscience. But the thought of being wrapped in David's arms, far away from the responsibilities of my life, was intoxicating. Okay, I finally breathed out, my voice barely above a whisper. Let's do it. As I drove home that evening, my mind swirled with conflicting thoughts. I was filled with a sense of freedom, but also guilt clawed at my insides. I pictured Jake, his warm smile, and the way he always made me feel secure. But then I remembered the thrill of David's touch, the way he looked at me with such intensity that it made my breath hitch. "Hey, how was your day?" Jake asked, as soon as I walked through the door. "It was fine," I replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. I noticed his brow furrow as he studied me, and I quickly looked away, hiding the turmoil brewing inside. "You seem a bit off," he said, concern lacing his voice. "I'm just tired," I lied, my heart racing as I thought about the weekend ahead. Long day at work. We settled into our routine, but my mind was elsewhere, drifting to thoughts of David and the freedom I craved. Each time Jake touched me, I felt a pang of guilt mixed with excitement, reminding me of the secret that was about to unfold. The day of the trip arrived, and I could hardly contain my excitement. I had come up with the perfect excuse for Jake, telling him I had a work seminar that would keep me away for the weekend. He seemed to accept it without question, wrapping me in a warm hug before I left. "Be safe," he whispered, and I forced myself to nod, guilt washing over me. Driving away from home felt like a leap into the unknown. As I approached the cabin, the anticipation built within me, mingling with the fear of what I was about to do. When I stepped inside, the air was thick with tension, and the sight of David waiting for me made my heart race. "You made it," he grinned, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "I can't believe I'm actually here," I said, a nervous laugh escaping my lips. "Just relax. It's just us," he replied, stepping closer, his presence filling the room. As we settled into the cabin, every moment felt electric. We talked and laughed as if we had known each other forever, the connection between us deepening with every shared story. I could feel the boundaries of my reality slipping away, replaced by this intoxicating chemistry we had. "Want to take a walk?" David suggested, his voice low and inviting. "Yes," I breathed, unable to resist. We stepped outside, the crisp mountain air refreshing and exhilarating. The scenery was breathtaking, but all I could focus on was the man beside me. As we strolled, our hands brushed together, sending sparks flying. I could hardly breathe. "Do you ever think about this?" he asked, stopping to look into my eyes. "Think about what?" I replied, trying to play coy, but my heart was pounding. "This," he said, gesturing between us. "Us." "I don't know," I admitted, my voice trembling. "It's complicated." "Complicated can be fun," he said, stepping closer, his breath warm against my skin. In that moment, I felt the walls I had built around my heart begin to crumble. The thrill of being with him, of escaping my reality, was overwhelming. I had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. "Let's make the most of this weekend," David said, his voice a soft promise, and I knew I was ready to embrace whatever came next. I returned home after that weekend, my heart racing and my mind a swirl of emotions. The moment I stepped through the door, the weight of my actions pressed down on me like a heavy blanket. I could still feel the lingering warmth of David's touch, still hear his laughter echoing in my ears, but as I looked around my familiar surroundings, the reality of my life came crashing back. Jake was in the other room, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in my heart. "Hey, how was your meeting?" Jake called out, his voice cheerful and full of life. I forced a smile, trying to mask the turmoil inside me. "It went well, just the usual stuff," I replied, my voice a little too high-pitched. I felt a pang of guilt as I watched him, the man I loved, completely unaware of my betrayal. I moved into the living room, with its soft lighting and comfortable furniture. a stark contrast to the chaos in my mind. Jake was sitting on the couch, flipping through a magazine. His dark hair fell over his forehead, in that way I used to find so endearing. But now, all I could think about was David and the thrill of our time together. A knot tightened in my stomach as I recalled David's mischievous grin, the way he made me feel alive in ways Jake never did anymore. "Want to watch a movie later?" Jake asked, glancing up at me with those warm brown eyes. I nodded, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. "Sure, that sounds great." But even as I spoke, the thought of sitting next to him, pretending everything was normal, felt suffocating. As the evening wore on, I tried to focus on Jake, but my mind kept drifting back to David. I remembered the way he had looked at me, his eyes dark with desire. The memory of his kiss lingered on my lips, a sweet reminder of what I had chosen over everything else. "What's on your mind?" Jake asked, tilting his head slightly. I hesitated, wondering if I could tell him the truth. "Just work stuff," I replied, my heart racing as I thought about how I could easily slip up. Jake nodded, but I could see the concern etched on his face. "You've been a bit distant lately. Is everything okay?" I wanted to scream that everything was far from okay, that I was caught in a web of lies and lust. But instead, I just smiled softly. "I'm fine, really. Just a lot on my plate." After dinner, we settled on the couch, and I felt the familiar comfort of his arm around me. Yet, all I could think about was how I had betrayed him, how each moment spent with him felt like a lie. I could feel David's presence even in the stillness of our living room, and it made me shiver with excitement and guilt. Later that night, as I lay beside Jake, I felt the tension in my body. I could hear him breathing steadily, but my mind was racing. I thought about the proposal David had made for another meeting, another chance to throw caution to the wind. My heart raced at the thought, and I felt a thrill course through me. I closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. All I could think about was the next time I would see David, the thrill of our secret. It felt like a drug, and I was addicted. The guilt was there, lurking in the background, but the excitement drowned it out. I was living a double life, and I didn't know how long I could keep it up. The next day at work, the atmosphere felt charged. I could sense David's presence even before I saw him. When our eyes met across the conference room, everything else faded away. The buzz of conversation around us vanished, and it was just him and me, caught in a moment that felt electric. "Hey," he said, a teasing smile playing on his lips. "Did you miss me?" I felt heat rush to my cheeks. "You know I did," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He took a step closer, and I could feel the pull between us. "We should talk later," he said, his eyes glinting with mischief. "About what?" I asked, trying to sound casual, even though my heart was pounding. "About our next adventure," he replied, and I felt a thrill of excitement mixed with fear. As the day dragged on, I couldn't concentrate on anything except the thought of what David wanted to discuss. My phone buzzed, and I glanced down to see a message from him. "Meet me at the usual spot?" I hesitated, my heart racing. I knew I should say no, that I should stop this madness. But the allure of the forbidden was too strong. I quickly typed back, "Okay, see you there." When the clock struck 5, I felt a rush of adrenaline as I made my way to the cafe where we had first met. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I tried to calm my nerves. I knew I was playing with fire, but the excitement was intoxicating. As I walked in, I spotted David immediately. He was leaning against the counter, his expression one of impatience mixed with desire. When he saw me, his face broke into a grin that sent shivers down my spine. "Hey there," he said, his voice low and inviting. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't show." "I couldn't resist," I replied, my heart racing. He stepped closer, his scent enveloping me, and I felt my resolve weakening. "I've been thinking about you," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "Me too," I admitted. And in that moment, I knew I was in too deep. I was crossing lines I had never intended to cross, and yet, the thrill of it all was overwhelming. As we sat in the cafe, talking and laughing, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living a lie. But every time I looked into David's eyes, that guilt faded into the background, replaced by a desire that felt all-consuming. I was caught in a storm, and there was no turning back now. The office was quiet when David texted me, asking if I could meet him for an impromptu meeting that evening. My heart raced at the thought. It was risky, but the thrill of it sent a shiver down my spine. I glanced around to ensure no one was watching as I quickly typed my response. "Sure. What time?" As the sun dipped below the horizon, I found myself standing outside the office building, feeling a mix of excitement and dread. I knew this was a dangerous game we were playing, but the thought of seeing David again sent a rush of adrenaline through me. I stepped inside, the familiar scent of coffee and paper greeting me, but it felt different tonight. The air was charged with an energy I couldn't ignore. When I reached our usual conference room, my breath caught in my throat. David was already there, leaning casually against the table, a confident smile playing on his lips. The sight of him sent warmth flooding through me. "You came," he said, his voice low and inviting. "I didn't want to miss this," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant, but I could feel the heat creeping up my neck. He stepped closer, and I could see the glint of mischief in his eyes. "I thought we could discuss the project," he said, but I knew that wasn't the real reason for our meeting. The tension crackled between us, thick and intoxicating. It was as if the walls were closing in, and all that mattered was this moment. "Of course," I said, attempting to focus on the work, but it was impossible. My mind was racing with thoughts of what had happened between us before. The stolen glances, the brushes of our hands, and that kiss in the parking lot that still lingered in my memory. David closed the door behind us, and I felt a rush of fear and excitement. "I shouldn't be doing this," I whispered, half-heartedly trying to convince myself. "Neither should I," he replied, stepping closer. "But it feels so right, doesn't it?" His breath was warm against my skin, and I shivered involuntarily at his proximity. Before I could respond, he leaned in and captured my lips with his, and all thoughts of guilt vanished. I melted against him, losing myself in the taste of him, the way his hands tangled in my hair, pulling me closer. It felt like a storm, wild and chaotic, but I couldn't pull myself away. "God, I've missed this," he murmured against my mouth, his eyes dark with desire. I could feel the urgency in his touch, the way he explored every inch of me, as if I were the only thing that mattered in his world. "I shouldn't be here," I breathed, but I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay lost in this moment, in this man who made me feel alive in ways I hadn't felt in years. "Stay with me," he urged, his hands gripping my waist, pulling me against him. "Just for a little while longer." I looked into his eyes, searching for some sign of hesitation, some reason to walk away. But all I found was a fierce determination that matched my own. The thrill of being caught, of crossing a line I never thought I would, was exhilarating. "Okay," I finally said, and the word felt like a promise. I knew I was stepping into dangerous territory, but the excitement of it all drowned out the voice of reason in my head. We lost ourselves in each other, the outside world fading away as we gave in to the passion that had been simmering between us for so long. Each kiss ignited a fire within me, and I felt alive in a way I hadn't in what felt like an eternity. Minutes turned into what felt like hours, as we wrapped ourselves in each other, oblivious to the consequences that loomed just beyond the door. The thrill of the risk made everything feel more intense, more urgent. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, drowning out the logical part of my brain that screamed for me to stop. "Do you ever think about what we're doing?" I asked breathlessly, pausing for a moment, my forehead resting against his. "Every second," he admitted, his hands tracing my arms, sending shivers down my spine. "But I can't help myself. I want you too much." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. I wanted him too. But with every moment, the guilt slithered back into my mind, reminding me of Jake, of the life I had built. "What if someone finds out?" I whispered, panic creeping into my voice. "Let them," he said fiercely, his eyes burning into mine. "This is our moment, and I don't want to waste it worrying about what might happen." I knew he was right. I was tired of living in fear, tired of being the perfect wife, when inside I felt like a stranger in my own life. The thrill of the unknown was too alluring to resist. As the minutes slipped away, we surrendered to the moment, losing ourselves in each other once more. I could feel the world around us fading until it was just us, wrapped in our own little bubble of desire and need. The danger only heightened the pleasure, and as we succumbed to our desires, I felt a rush of exhilaration. This was what I had been missing, this reckless abandon, this intoxicating connection. As we pulled away, breathless and flushed, I knew this was just the beginning of something that could change everything. I looked into David's eyes and saw the same mixture of excitement and fear reflected back at me. We were teetering on the edge, and there was no going back. As I stepped into the office, an unusual quietness enveloped me. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above, and the smell of stale coffee lingered in the air. I glanced around, half expecting to see familiar faces, but the place felt eerily empty. My heart raced as I made my way towards the conference room, knowing David would be there waiting for me. When I opened the door, there he was, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips. The sight of him sent a rush of heat through my body. "You made it," he said, his voice low and inviting. I could see the anticipation in his eyes, and it made my breath hitch. I wasn't sure if I should, I admitted, my heart pounding. The thrill of being here, alone with him, was intoxicating, yet terrifying. What if someone sees us? David stepped closer, his gaze locked onto mine. "Let them see. I'm tired of hiding what we have." His words sent a shiver down my spine. I knew he was right, but the reality of my situation weighed heavily on my mind. "I can't just forget about Jake," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The thought of my husband, the man who had stood by me through thick and thin, clawed at my conscience. Yet standing here in front of David, the world outside faded away. "Forget him for a moment," David urged, his voice smooth like silk. "Just focus on us." I couldn't deny the magnetic pull between us. It was as if the air crackled with energy, and every unspoken word drew us closer. "What if this is a mistake?" I asked, though deep down, I knew I wanted this, wanted him. David stepped even closer, his breath warm against my skin. "Maybe it is, but right now, it feels so right." His fingers brushed against my arm, igniting a fire within me. I swallowed hard, torn between desire and guilt. "I shouldn't be here," I said, though the words felt hollow. "And yet you are," he replied, a teasing smile on his lips. "So why not make the most of it?" Before I could respond, he leaned in, his lips finding mine in a kiss that sent shockwaves through my entire being. It was electric, passionate, and everything I had been craving. My mind raced with thoughts of Jake, but all that mattered in this moment was David. I melted into the kiss, losing myself in the taste of him, the urgency of his touch. My hands found their way to his hair, fingers tangling in the dark strands as I pulled him closer. The world outside ceased to exist, and I was consumed by the heat between us. God, I've wanted this for so long, David murmured against my lips, desire lacing his words. Me too, I admitted, my breath hitching as I pulled away slightly to look into his eyes. The intensity of his gaze made my heart race. But what are we doing? This is wrong. Is it? He challenged, his brow raised. Or is it just what you need? What we both need? The thrill of his words sent a rush of exhilaration through me, and I felt the walls I had built around my heart begin to crumble. I shouldn't, I repeated, but the conviction was fading. Just for tonight, he said, leaning in again, his lips brushing against mine. Let's forget everything else. I hesitated, my mind swirling with thoughts of Jake, of the life we had built together. But the yearning inside me was too strong to resist. I nodded slowly, the decision hanging heavy in the air. Okay, I whispered, barely able to believe I was saying the words. David's smile widened, and he captured my lips again, deeper this time, as if he were trying to claim me. I responded with equal fervor, surrendering to the moment, to the passion that coursed through us like wildfire. The kiss deepened, and I felt his hands gripping my waist, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. My body responded instinctively, melting against him as he deepened the kiss, exploring every inch of my mouth with a hunger that mirrored my own. I was lost in a whirlwind of desire, each kiss igniting a fire within me that I had kept buried for too long. The office, with its sterile environment, faded away, leaving just the two of us in our own world of longing and lust. Let's take this to the couch, he suggested, his voice thick with desire. I nodded, breathless, and he led me to the small seating area in the corner of the room. The moment we reached the couch, he pulled me down beside him, and I could feel the heat radiating off his body. Are you sure about this? He asked, searching my eyes for any sign of doubt. I hesitated for just a moment, thinking of Jake and the life we had. But in that instant, all I could feel was the weight of desire pulling me towards David. Yes, I finally breathed, the word tumbling out before I could think. As David leaned in to kiss me again, I surrendered completely. The thrill of the unknown consumed me, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt alive. The passion that had been brewing between us erupted, and everything else faded into the background. In that office, we were lost in each other, and nothing else mattered.